In the introduction to counterpoint video, I labeled certain intervals as being either harmonically consonant or dissonant. The word consonance comes from the Latin consonare, literally meaning to sound together. We identified two categories of harmonic consonances, perfect and imperfect. The word perfect means complete. A perfect consonance implies the intervallic relationship sounds completely together. And an imperfect consonance, I guess, means sounds together but not completely. Well, in this video, let me provide you with a little bit of scientific clarification on the subject before we move on. Sound is vibration. The rate of that vibration or sound wave determines pitch. Faster vibrations indicate relatively higher pitches, and slower waves produce lower pitches. The number of vibrations of a wave per second is known as a hertz, named after the guy who proved the existence of electromagnetic waves, not the car rental company, just to be clear. Let's imagine that the wave that produces this low C vibrates at 100 hertz. It doesn't, it's more like 65, but the math will be less complicated if we use 100 hertz. So imagine that the string producing this low C is 10 feet long. We'll go ahead and call it 120 inches. Again, it isn't, but stay with me here in hypothetical land. If I increase the tension on the string, the vibrations will speed up and the pitch will rise. If I reduce the tension on the string, the pitch will go down. But there is another way to alter the pitch. I can shorten or lengthen the string. Shorter strings create higher pitches, and longer strings are more adept at making lower pitches. If we take our 120-inch string that is at the correct tension to vibrate at 100 hertz, and we cut it in half, we automatically double the frequency. If our 120-inch string vibrates at 100 hertz, then our 60-inch string vibrates at 200 hertz. If we call the 100 hertz the pitch C, 200 hertz produces this sound. Doubling any frequency creates the sound of a perfect octave. Again, what does perfect mean? Complete. So what is complete? The waves, the vibrations of these two waves, 100 hertz and 200 hertz, are in such agreement with one another, we don't even consider them different pitches. They are in complete agreement with one another. They blend completely. So if 100 hertz is C, then 200 hertz is C as well, just an octave higher. What if I cut the 60-inch string in half? What is the frequency of the 30-inch string? Well, we said 60 inches was 200 hertz, so 30 inches is 400 hertz. You double the frequency, we jump another octave. We credit Pythagoras with discovering that simpler mathematical ratios create more euphonious consonances. So a 1-to-1 ratio is a perfect unison, right? It's the same frequency. A more complete blending of frequencies just isn't possible. If we double the frequency, that's a 1-to-2 ratio, and that's what creates that perfect octave. Now the root of these ratios, the frequency of the complete string, we call that the fundamental pitch. In this case, we are relating back to the fundamental pitch C at 100 hertz. What about a 1-to-3 ratio? That would be 100 hertz compared to 300 hertz. If 100 hertz is our fundamental, and it's this C, 300 hertz generates this G. This C to this G is a compound interval. It's a perfect octave plus a perfect fifth. But why is this called a perfect fifth? Well, this frequency ratio is still remarkably pure, with very little clashing between the waves. Since a 1 to 2 ratio is our perfect octave, and a 1 to 3 ratio is a perfect octave plus a perfect fifth, a 2 to 3 ratio is simply this perfect fifth. A 1 to 4 ratio is going to be a double octave. So 1 to 2 is a perfect octave, 2 to 4 is a perfect octave. So 1 to 4 is 2 perfect octaves. There is the possibility of a 3 to 4 ratio. If 300 Hertz is G and 400 Hertz is this C, a 3 to 4 ratio creates a perfect fourth. 3 to 4 is still a relatively simple ratio, and it's the last one of the intervals to receive that special classification of being called perfect. But there is an essential difference between the 2 to 3 ratio that generates a perfect fifth and a 3 to 4 ratio that creates a perfect fourth. We calculated the compound perfect fifth, that was the perfect octave plus the perfect fifth, up from the fundamental pitch, right? 1 to 3 was the perfect octave plus a perfect fifth. We can't do that with the perfect fourth. We can't create a compound perfect fourth by a simple ratio of 1 to anything, right? The perfect fourth derives itself. It's reliant upon the existence of that perfect fifth. The inversion of a perfect fifth is a perfect fourth. And this dependency is acoustically why in counterpoint a perfect fourth is considered a harmonic dissonance. The harmonic perfect consonances are the perfect unison, the perfect octave, and the perfect fifth. Notice the order that I'm listing them in. We have the 1 to 1 ratio, the perfect unison, the 1 to 2, the perfect octave, and 2 to 3, the perfect fifth. All of these are harmonically pure, but the ratios are all becoming more complex and therefore relatively less consonant. The harmonically imperfect consonances are the major, minor, thirds, and sixths. The ratios for these, dirty consonances are the major third is 4 to 5. Remember, the inversion of a major third is a minor sixth, so the ratio is 5 to 8. The 4 to 8 ratio creating that perfect octave displacement. The minor third ratio is 5 to 6. Since 6 is divisible by 2, we can invert the minor third into a major sixth as 5 to 3, or rising from 3 to 5. All of the other intervals, that's the seconds and sevenths, and any augmented or diminished intervals, are going to be harmonically dissonant. Before we close this video out, I do want to illustrate consonances a little more organically. The brass family of instruments evolved from hollowed out animal horns. They're often referred to as horns, like a trumpet is a horn. Of the modern metallic varieties of brass instruments, the simplest is called the bugle. A bugle is similar to the trumpet, except that it has no valves to lengthen the air column. That would be altering the pitch, right? The longer, the lower the pitch. A bugle is merely a tube with a flared bell, kind of like a hollowed out animal horn, but it includes a mouthpiece which helps focus the vibrations of the player's lips. Now, the lack of a mechanical way to change the instrument's length to affect the pitch, it doesn't mean that the bugle is only capable of producing a single pitch. The player can buzz their lips at an infinite number of frequencies, but the bugle will only resonate at a few. The frequencies the bugle, or any pipe for that matter, will propagate create the same ratios we discussed earlier. I'm going to notate this in the bugle's sounding key of B flat. The fundamental 1 to 1 ratio. A perfect octave higher than this fundamental is 1 to 2. Then we have another perfect fifth above that. That's 2 to 3. A perfect fourth is 3 to 4. Major third, 4 to 5. And finally, minor third, 5 to 6. Most bugle calls limit themselves to 4 and sometimes 5 of these pitches, leaving out the fundamental because it's so low and unreliable on a really compact instrument like the bugle. Let's listen to a couple of bugle calls and help us recognize the prevalence of these consonances. Here are the big takeaways from this lecture. The difference between consonance and dissonance isn't entirely a cultural construct. There are scientific explanations for many of our musical perceptions. Furthermore, there is a spectrum of consonance and dissonance. While there is a relatively hard line between what is and is not consonant, so what's consonant or dissonant, there are consonant intervals that are more consonant than others. Simple frequency ratios produce greater blend, meaning more consonants. However, a composition without any conflict is, let me say it this way. All consonants and no dissonance makes for a dull composition. In first species counterpoint, we only use harmonic consonances. To generate an interesting musical flow, we try to limit perfect consonances to the first and last notes of our counterpoint, using the more exciting imperfect consonances everywhere in between. All right, more counterpoint and voice leading basics coming up. Thanks.